Albert, you said before in terms of like climate, it's about shifting attention, which you mentioned earlier. And you said before about putting 50% of GDP to climate and sustainability. And I read this and I was like, wow, geez. Is that even possible? We're at 5% today, I think you said. How can 50 be done?
I think it can be done if and when we get the right kind of leadership. Certain types of topics go from being kind of a losing proposition to being a winning proposition. And I believe that climate will be that kind of thing. It'll go from something where politicians feel, oh, I can't really talk about it, there's not enough voters, I'm not going to get elected, and so forth. I think it's going to go from that to something where somebody will run and say, no, this is both the biggest threat and the biggest opportunity that we've had in a long time. And so we're going to lean into it. We're going to lean into it hard. And once that happens and somebody gets elected somewhere in a big way on that program, I think that'll make a lot of things possible that aren't currently possible. You know, when I look at the set of technologies that we have on the table, if we deploy them the right way, we can wind up with very cheap, almost free electricity. I think we can wind up with very clean cities. I think we can wind up with less land being used for agriculture, more land being available for biodiversity, for recreation, and some combination of the two. I think there's an incredible, amazing future that we can get to once we develop the will to do it. And I think there's another related misunderstanding, and it goes back to what we were talking earlier about transitions. As long as you're caught in this idea that this is an incremental transition, your approach to the climate crisis will also be incremental, but it's not a problem that can be solved with incremental approaches. So I believe this is, in a way, a leadership opportunity. It's an opportunity for politicians to run on a different platform, and I believe that will happen.
When you say run on a different platform, you mean with the central thesis being climate protection?
With the central thesis being that we need dramatic, radical change and we need massive resource reallocation for some time period to get to a new age, leaning into the idea that the time for incremental change has come and gone, that this really is about transformational change across the board.
So if you're a politician, and you say 50% of GDP is going to climate, or 30%, or 20%, there's the opportunity cost of budget. And respectfully, one of my mentors, so I didn't say this, always reminds me something. People are always bluntly less smart or intelligent than you think. And 90% of people will be going, hey, what are you doing? You're taking away from my budget. You're taking away from my budget. You would never get elected.
I don't think so. I think that people want to actually be called upon. People want to be given purpose. This ties into the earlier part of the conversation where a lot of people feel they don't have purpose. A lot of people feel they don't have hope, kind of a positive outlook in their lives. What leadership ultimately is about is to craft the kind of visions that people can rally behind. And I just think that opportunity exists today, and I believe we will see people leaning into this. In a way, the success of Trump, which took some people by surprise, was a version of that. Not the kind of version I'm excited about, but it was somebody saying, look, I will take you to a great place. I mean, it was an imagined place in the past, but it was about making radical changes, not about making incremental changes. It shows that there is an appetite for that. So I just think this idea that people somehow don't get it or people aren't smart enough, I think that's wrong. I think people do get it. I think people do understand that the thing we've been doing for the last 10 to 20 years of incrementally trying to fix industrial age is not, in fact, working.
I'm really just asking all the questions I want to hear. Because I very much actually said the same as what you were saying to a friend the other day. And the friend actually in Pakistan said, Harry, how privileged. Your countries have, bluntly squandered our countries for years on resources. And now we're just getting to some form of standard of living that's really attractive to anyone. And now you want to, make that more challenging with climate change? Climate change...
I think it's the opposite, actually. I think that developing nations can leapfrog. They don't have much of an existing infrastructure that needs... if you look in big parts of Africa, they don't have a grid. They can lean right into decentralized energy production. Just why does Africa have better adoption of mobile banking? It's because it didn't have banking. So I actually think there's a huge leapfrogging opportunity, and a lot of the framing of this I just think is off. Now, I do think it's our responsibility to help, like, if all the solar panels are going to be produced outside of Africa, and then it becomes extractive, where we're basically like harvesting African solar energy to make green hydrogen to pump to Europe, and not growing the African economy, yeah, well, that's definitely on us. But to say that we cannot have growth in places like Pakistan or Africa unless we ruin the climate, I just think it's flat wrong. It's flat wrong.
What else is flat wrong about how we think about climate that you often hear?
Well, what's flat wrong is that people seem to think that this is like a nuisance problem and that, the private sector somehow has got it covered. I just think people have no understanding of the actual physics of this crisis. To put this into perspective, the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere was very, very constant for about a 10,000-year time period. That 10,000-year time period coincides with the rise of the agrarian age. And then, the last 100 years, we've been radically changing that balance during the industrial age. And so in climate speak, we call this the pre-industrial baseline. We call this 10,000 year period where the concentration of greenhouse gas in the atmosphere was roughly constant. And so the question is, how much energy, how much heat are we now retaining in the Earth system that used to go out into space, right? So what greenhouse gases do is they let the sunlight in, so stuff warms up, and then they keep the heat here. They trap the heat instead of the heat radiating back out into space. And so the question is, how much heat is that? And obviously the right unit to express that is joule, but nobody has an idea what a joule or petajoule or, is. So one way to express it is in terms of Hiroshima-sized nuclear bombs. And so I do this often as a survey in like large rooms of people, and I put it up as a live survey, and I sort of say, well, how much heat do you think it is? Do you think it's like one Hiroshima-sized nuclear bomb per year, one per month? I give them options, all the way down to, one per second. And basically, the mode of the distribution winds up being somewhere around like 1 per hour, in some groups maybe 1 per minute. But the reality is it's 4 to 7 per second, right? So of every second, of every minute, of every hour, of every day, it's like 4 to 7 Hiroshima-sized nuclear bombs worth of heat. Now, I wanted to imagine for a moment a very different setup. Imagine alien spaceships hovering above Earth, and throwing 4 to 7 Hiroshima-sized nuclear bombs into our atmosphere every second. What would we do?
Shoot them down?
Yeah, we would drop everything. We'd be like, there's nothing that matters. They're here to kill us. They're trying to overheat the planet. We made a movie about it. It's called Independence Day, right? So, we would drop everything. Except it isn't aliens, it's ourselves. And it's not bright explosions that you can see, it's just the molecules in the air, especially the molecules in the ocean wiggling harder, because that's what heat is, right? So, but the amount of energy is absolutely mind-boggling. It's totally extraordinary. And so I think where people are flat wrong is that they think that this is like some, problem that, can easily be that we're on a path to fixing this problem. We are not on a path to fixing this problem. The economists recently said, give up on 1.5 degrees because it's gone. They're right. But the answer isn't like, oh, let's give up on the whole thing. The answer is like, no, we're so far behind that even 1.5 degrees of warming at this point is, we've already blown through it, and we're going to blow through it.
I'm a control freak, and so I like to feel like we can take action and we can make a difference or control as much as we can moving forward. The trouble is, I saw a brilliant stat, well, not a brilliant, but a stat the other day that said that if Canada hit their climate change targets for the next 25 years, it wouldn't be as much as China hitting theirs for the next year. And I thought, wow.
Obviously, the climate crisis is a global problem, and one country doing the right thing isn't going to solve the problem. But you got to start somewhere, right? The opportunity to transform economies for the better is in the here and now. The threat is in the here and now. And I believe that by leaning into it, we can change, not just transform our economies, but show what's possible. And I think that will get emulated. So it's not like, for some time period, I was actually less concerned about China, to be frank, because I think the Chinese understood the climate problem. I was more concerned about India. But it's very encouraging. We made an investment in India in a company called Bolt that deploys charging networks for two-wheelers and three-wheelers, EV two-wheelers and three-wheelers, and now also four-wheelers. And I just had a board meeting with them earlier today, and the network utilization is growing rapidly, and India is leaning into EVs. So I believe that what we do in economies, even if these economies aren't as big or aren't as polluting today as, let's say, China or India are, it matters because it sets a clear path in that direction, and I believe that's important. Waiting for everybody else is not how entrepreneurs work, it's not how venture works, and it's not how the world works. You don't wait until everybody is on the same page. You start doing the right things, and then others will come along.
You know, you take action, Albert. You take
Yes.
action. And I saw you say that civil disobedience is compulsory to climate action. And I thought, what? The Just Oil people hanging off a bridge? That's compulsory. Albert.
No, here's what I think. What I think is that the history of making big changes is one of applying pressure to the existing system. Mm-hmm. That was true for women's right to vote, the suffragette movement. That was true for the civil rights movement. That was true for the AIDS crisis. It wasn't until ACT UP started with civil disobedience that enough attention was being paid to HIV and AIDS. And I think the same is true for climate. I mean, people may be upset about the tactics, but the reality is it's keeping the topic in the news day after day after day, and that is absolutely crucially important.